What's up, everybody? It's Tom Pelissero here with USA Today, back for another Friday Facebook Live chat. I apologize for bumping this thing from the morning to the afternoon, but it was a fairly late night at US Bank Stadium for the Vikings and Cowboys game. A wild finish, absolutely, in that game. Cowboys now running their streak to 11 consecutive wins. The Vikings now in a spot where they're really backed up against the wall at 6-6. Bring out all your questions, rants, raves, complaints about officiating, whatever you got. Leave them in the comments. We'll get to as many of those as we can over the next 20 minutes or so. And let's start out by talking about the officiating in last night's game. I will always say that it's impossible to say that NFL officiating has gotten worse, which is what everyone wants to say, because we have more of a means to judge it than ever before. In terms of HD TV, the number of different slow motion replays and freeze frames, even the way that things like Twitter and social media can influence things by showing one angle, one clip, one freeze frame, which may not necessarily tell the entire story. So it is more difficult on officials than it's ever been. But I think that the end of last night's game was a perfect example of why there are people in the league who would really like to see certain adjustments made, whether it's an expansion of replay, more involvement from the league office, from the headquarters there where Dean Blandino and others are on game day, whatever it may be, just to give officials more of a tool to be able to counteract some of the situations like what you saw last night. Last play of the game, Sam Bradford gets hit in the head by Cedric Thornton. I don't think there's any question about that. There's subjectivity in all the rules in terms of it must be a forcible blow to the head, just like when you see people spouting the various conspiracy theories about a missed holding call or missed pass interference. It's about whether or not there was a material restriction. Merely having your hands on somebody, grabbing jersey, not necessarily enough for it. There's all different sorts of things, and that's part of the reason you've had pushback from the competition committee and from ownership through the years. But take that final play in isolation. Bradford, and you can actually see it, I watched back on the TV copy, Bradford said that the explanation that he got was from the referee was you did not get hit in the face mask. To which Bradford had just had this look on his face like, I don't know what really to say to that. You can see the official saying he got you, in the upper shoulder pad area. You watch it back on replay. You see Bradford's face mask getting turned to the side. It reminded me of a playoff game I was at 7 years or so ago, 2009, or the playoffs after the 2009 season. That wild game that finished like 51-45 down in Arizona. Aaron Rodgers' face mask gets grabbed. It ends up being a strip sack, fumble recovery for a touchdown. And Scott Green, the official at that time, did not throw a flag. There are still a lot of Packers fans who are bitter about that particular outcome. They're never going to catch everything. You got to remember that. You got 22 different bodies that can obscure things. If the official, like in this case, had an angle where he saw the left hand come down on Bradford's upper chest, he did not see the right hand on the other side, that's understandable. You only get one look at it. But when everybody else at home sees the guy getting hit in the face, you would like to think that there might be some level of a mechanism that you can put into place. As many Cowboys fans also informed me in no uncertain terms, and I actually mentioned it in my column, so I'd appreciate it if you click the Twitter link before complaining in the future. You also could have potentially called a false start on TJ Clemmings. I didn't think that it was blatant. Tackles sometimes will get the benefit of the doubt in terms of coming off the ball early, but you could have thrown a flag for a false start in that case too. How far do you want to go? What do you want to be reviewable? How many of the penalties do you want to be examining, and how do you not disrupt the pace of play, particularly in the last 2 minutes if things are coming from the booth? I know that Bill Belichick in the past is among those who have said, give me 2 challenges, let me use them for whatever I want. Maybe you could do that over the entire 60 minutes and not merely the first 28 minutes of each half. The Buffalo Bills moved a proposal last year that would have allowed coaches to challenge anything except for scoring plays and turnovers. That got voted down. A lot of different replay changes through the years have gotten voted down, and there's a bunch of different reasons for that. So I'm not saying that there's any easy answer. Absolutely not. But I also understand where there's frustration and where the league office may be looking more and more here. I just don't know how long you can stave this off when you have the illegal bat penalty at the end of the game against Seattle last year. Imagine if this is the Super Bowl and the quarterback gets hit in the face and you don't end up throwing that flag. Again, there's a bunch of different fouls you could have on every play. I'm not suggesting that you go through, review the tape after every single snap and be examining for fouls, but deciding play, make or break, and it appears, at least on tape, that you missed a call. I think that's the sort of thing that is going to generate at least discussion at the competition committee level going forward. Taking nothing away from the Dallas Cowboys, who played I don't think their style of football necessarily. I was talking to one of the players after the game who said, sometimes we got to get some of those dirty wins. They did not control the football the way that they have a lot of the time with Ezekiel Elliott and Dak Prescott. I thought the Minnesota Vikings defense showed why they were able to carry the Vikings really the first 5 or 6 games of this season. They played out of their minds for most of that game, other than the one play where Harrison Smith gets beat on the double move by Dez Bryant. They held them in check, but a huge special teams gaffe by Adam Thielen with the fumble near the goal line. Cowboys convert that. Bad punting night for Jeff Locke. They made too many mistakes. Cowboys didn't make as many, and that's why they're now sitting there at 11-1. They can wrap up a playoff berth heading into this weekend, and certainly are in line for the number 1 seed. First time that they would have had that in a number of years. I remain impressed by Dallas, even though, again, I don't think that they played their style of football last night, but they just sort of keep finding ways in some of these games. And from the Vikings perspective, I think they showed that if they can get into the playoffs, they still can be dangerous. They've got huge issues, especially along the offensive line. You still see them trying to figure out, how are we going to run the football? How are we going to generate any sort of a passing game? Can we get the ball downfield when Sam Bradford's got about two and a half seconds to throw, if he's lucky a lot of the time? And they're also taking too many penalties in the red zone. They've got problems on that side of the ball, but you take that defense you saw last night, that group can play with anybody. They basically got to run the table. I think that they do have a shot to do that based on the matchups at Jacksonville, home against the Indianapolis Colts, then at Green Bay on Christmas Eve. That's probably the toughest one. Then home against the battered Chicago Bears in the season finale. Is 10-6 enough to get into the playoffs? I don't know, especially since the Detroit Lions have the tiebreaker on the Vikings in the NFC North. But it would at least give them the opportunity. And I would certainly not rule out the Vikings being able to do some damage if they get into the playoffs. At least be able to take a good team to the limits just based upon the way that they're able to play defense. Bunch of big games this weekend. I'm heading to Pittsburgh for what I think is the most interesting matchup. It's not a divisional play. There's actually no divisional games, which is a pretty big rarity over this weekend. But a New York Giants team that's won 6 in a row, I think that they still have things that when you look at the Giants, you can poke a lot of holes in them. Can they actually run the football effectively? Is that defense as good as they've flashed at times? I think they got a lot of talent on that side of the football, and they've got they can spread the ball around a lot better than they could a year ago on offense with Sterling Shepard, with Victor Cruz being back, not just making everything about Eli Manning and Odell Beckham Jr. But they have not, if you look at their schedule, they haven't exactly been taking down the Titans of the league, and they haven't been blowing anybody out. Last week's game over against Cleveland was really the biggest spread, and even that one went into the fourth quarter, and the Browns had a shot. So taking on a Steelers team that obviously can put up a ton of points, I think this could end up being a fairly high-scoring game. I think it's going to be a really good test for that Giants defense going up against the Steelers, and the way that they're able to use all areas of the field with Le'Veon Bell and Antonio Brown, Ladarius Green getting into the mix, and of course Ben Roethlisberger and his ability to extend plays. The Giants can at least keep some level of heat on the Dallas Cowboys with that matchup in New York the following week. You beat the Steelers, get a big win there, you move to 9-3, you get the Cowboys coming in, you already won the first game against them. You could keep things interesting at a time where, right now, if the Giants were to lose on Sunday, you'd start having to look at the Cowboys and figuring out how soon they're going to wrap up the number 1 seed, not just wrap up the division. Some other big games this weekend, and of course we'll get to some of the questions too, if anybody can leave anything. I see we got some coming in on the officiating, so let's get to those. Another big one, though, Sunday night, Panthers and Seahawks out there in Seattle. I know a lot of people are going to panic on the Seahawks. This tends to happen. They're due for a couple of just total offensive duds every single season. Tampa Bay's personnel, a little bit like the Los Angeles Rams personnel, and the Rams have really been the Seahawks' kryptonite through the years. The offensive line play was not good enough. Noah Spence exposed George Fant. Fant really hadn't seen a lot of speed yet. He's a converted basketball player playing left tackle for the Seahawks. That was a challenging matchup. He didn't hold up well. I don't think they played well in the interior. Ifedi didn't play well. Glowinski didn't play well. They had a lot of issues up front, but I do think that they're able to bounce back. And an interesting test for a really, really good Seahawks defense that should have Earl Thomas back going up against the Panthers and their diverse running game. So again, bring out all your questions. Let's start to get to some of these here. From Sandra, let's start with that. Cowboys versus Raiders Super Bowl. Certainly could happen, Sandra. I think the Cowboys more and more, even though, again, last night they didn't exactly follow their formula. I think you have to look at them as a team that can really make some hay come January, especially if they get a bye, if they have home field advantage. They're rolling along pretty good. They're covering up their weaknesses on defense. It's not an overly talented defense in terms of their one-on-one pass rushers. They're cover guys. They play a ton of zone coverage on early downs. Don't have a great pass rush, although they look good against the Vikings and that terrible offensive line last night. But what they're able to do, I think, is play fast and play hard. Those are the hallmarks of what Rob Marinelli wants to do. And they've been good enough to back up an offense that right now is rolling as good as anybody. With the Raiders, I still have the Patriots as the AFC favorite in my mind, even after losing Rob Gronkowski. But I also would say that's a big blow to the Patriots. I know I'm stating the obvious there, but it's not just in the passing game. It's what everybody focuses on. Gronk is one of the unique matchup weapons in all of football. So you're going to have a trickle-down effect there, but also he is a big impact player in the running phase, too. The Patriots use two tight end sets on about 30% of their snaps. It's one of their favorite plays to run is this crunch play with LeGarrette Blount. Well, all of a sudden, if you take Gronk away, Bennett's been nicked up. You don't have anybody else with any experience at tight end. Are they going to be more in 11 personnel? One running back, one tight end, three receivers. They're going to do more of that. It's going to allow teams to put more focus in terms of taking away Julian Edelman and Martellus Bennett, try to beat you with Danny Amendola, Chris Hogan, and those guys. I think you're also going to see the Patriots, when matchups dictate, trying to pound the football a lot with Blount. It'll be interesting to see how it plays out there. The Raiders have been very impressive offensively so far. Defensively, even with Khalil Mack there, you look at some of the numbers, and it concerns me if you get into a certain type of matchup against a good offense, how well they're going to be able to hold up. From Michael, Steelers will win. I presume you're talking about Sunday. I'm picking the Steelers to win too. I think that they're going to challenge the Giants, especially on the back end of that defense. I know Landon Collins is having an excellent season, but in terms of some of the matchups beyond Janoris Jenkins, what the Steelers are going to be able to do, I think, tilts a little bit in their favor. Plus, they've got home field advantage in this game. Giants have not played a lot of great teams. Not saying the Steelers are a great team, but certainly in terms of their offensive talent, they stack up there with anybody. From Ezreal, the other point about officiating is it is a human element of the game. NFL officials in most games grade out at 90 to 95%. You're right on that. Absolutely. And that's what I'm saying is we all want to default, or a lot of people want to default to officiating is bad. It's not that. It's how we perceive it. The issue for the league, I think, becomes when you have fouls that are apparent to everybody at home, and you don't even have the tool there for officials to correct it. I don't even think that the play last night with Bradford is necessarily that egregious. I think that going back to Seattle and the illegal bat play last year, that's worse, because that just was a play where it happens directly in front of the official. You can see him hit the ball out of bounds. That is a function of a rule. The official reached for his flag, if I remember correctly, didn't end up throwing it. That's something where if somebody from New York could say, hey, it is the definitive play of the game, we've got to do something about it. You'd like to think that maybe you could come up with some mechanism where that would work, but then it ends up being this ball rolling down the hill. Okay, well, how are you defining definitive plays? Is it only fourth down plays? Well, then are you gonna grade or officiate third down different than fourth down? You're gonna officiate 3 minutes to go in a high leverage play different than 1 minute to go. And these are all sorts of things where they've not yet been able to get on the same page. I do think that it's a matter of when, not if. There are changes, and you do have some level of expansion of replay. I don't think it's just going to immediately go to what the Bills proposed back in March, which was let coaches challenge absolutely whatever they want, just in part because you have so much subjectivity to some of these calls, and they don't want to, as Rich McKay has said many times in the past, they don't want to supplement one person's judgment in place of another person's judgment. When the first one is judging the game at full speed, you'd end up rewriting the rule book for instant replay, and that's just not something that they really have an appetite to do. From Anthony, refs are on the take. I don't know who they'd be on the take from, Anthony. The Cowboys had some bad calls go against them last night, too. The holding on Doug Free, for instance, was a pretty borderline sort of a call. I don't know how you'd watch that game and say that the officials were tilting toward the Cowboys. I think really until the last play of the game, you'd say, if anything, the Vikings had come out on top. These things even out over time. Again, it's not a matter of that. It's a matter of when you have something that everybody at home can see on TV, how do the officials not have the ability to correct that when that is a play that is going to make or break the outcome of a game? Keep them coming. From Sander, Cowboys Nation baby, of course. From Tam, do you think Dak is going to flutter next season like he is just a one-season QB? No, I really don't think that. And I was somebody who was writing and talking based upon people I was talking to in the league about this for a lot early in the season, which was every young quarterback eventually is going to go through some sort of a slump. They're going to be challenged. They're going to struggle a bit. Dak has been able to push through that. Even in some of the games that he has struggled, there was one at home, I can't remember who was against earlier on in the season, about a month ago, where he did have a rocky game but came back in the fourth quarter. Steelers game a few weeks ago that I was at, that was a game that really turned my perception of Dak Prescott. Again, didn't play well in the early going, had a strip sack right out of the gate, but came back, and then in the fourth quarter, in the final minute of the game when they get the ball back after the fake spike touchdown by Ben Roethlisberger, if you watch that game live and you watch how they were attacking him, the Steelers were blitzing Dak third down every play throughout the course of the game. Got into the final series, they were still blitzing him, and just his poise to shift inside and outside the pocket, extend plays, all those things. I think we've gotten to the point where Dak Prescott is elevating the level of the people around him and not merely benefiting from the favorable matchups that he sees because you have Ezekiel Elliott and that really good offensive line. I think Dak is a quarterback that's built to last. This is not somebody who's just strictly using his legs to run around. He's making plays within the flow of the offense. He's making good decisions, and he's really, really accurate, which is one thing that's really stood out to scouts who are watching him around the league. I think that Dak Prescott has the opportunity to be a really good quarterback for a long time. Could he go through a slump? Absolutely, but we're 12 games into his rookie season. It hasn't happened yet, and that's pretty rare for a young quarterback, regardless of who they got around him. From Timothy, would a Carolina win at Seattle be convincing for playoffs talk? I think that the Panthers are a better team now than they were certainly the first month of the season. I think the big issue is not whether or not they're good enough to be competitive with good teams. I think it's just that they're in such a hole right now at 4-7. How do you climb back into it? I mean, to get to 9-7, you got to run off 5 consecutive wins. You got to hope that either the Falcons fall apart here, along with the Saints, along with the Bucs, that everybody in the division basically falls apart, or you've got to hope that nobody, Washington, Minnesota, Tampa, nobody steps forward and ends up getting to 10 wins to wrap up a wild card spot. Certainly the Panthers, even to give themselves an opportunity, have to run the table here, and even that might not be good enough. I think they can play with Seattle. Absolutely. I mean, we've seen those two teams match up in the past. The games have not always gone the same way, but I think that from a matchup perspective, they certainly are a team that can threaten the Seahawks. Even getting that win, though, you're still 5-7. You got to win 4 more games. From Jonathan, Ravens or Dolphins? I'm going to double check. I did pick the Ravens in that game. I always make sure before I give a contradictory opinion on this. That's a tough one to call, though. That's a coin flip game in my mind. I think that the reason that I lean toward Baltimore in this game is because of how good they've been stopping the run this season. And the Dolphins' offense all starts out with being able to pound it with Jay Ajayi to move people with that offensive line. If you put the game in Ryan Tannehill's hands, he's got to throw it 40 times. I think that he's going to be challenged. I think the Ravens' offense still just is kind of clunky at this point. They're shuffling different running backs in and out. Flacco has been up and down through the course of the season. They have had some explosive plays, which is always something that you see as a defining characteristic of Baltimore offenses. But, do they have enough against the Dolphins defense that is number one on third downs? 49ers moved the football pretty good on them a week ago. But in this sort of a matchup, I think it's going to be a low-scoring, grinded-out sort of game. My final score that I picked was 19-16 Ravens, and I probably think that's about what it's going to be. From Hannah, it seems to me that no matter how good a team is, there's a lot of us who will seek till they find fault in a player or coach. Even when there are none, why can't we all just be happy for the Cowboys while it lasts? Fair enough, Hannah. I think that you're right on that. I think because if you're a mediocre to bad team, you're just not being discussed as much. But everybody has weaknesses, okay? There's a pathway, as Mike McCarthy, the Packers coach, has said many times. He's always been a believer that there's a path to win every game. Doesn't matter whether the matchups look like they're in your favor, against your favor. There's always an opportunity to win a football game. And if you're looking at the Cowboys right now, you would say that the way that you can test them is to be able to expose what they lack on the back end outside of Orlando Scandrick, and to protect well enough against the pass rush that's just not very good. I mean, the numbers bear that out if you look at it. The Cowboys' defense has been okay. I would give them okay through the course of the season. They're not any better than that. You go back to the Steelers game, Pittsburgh put up 440-odd yards, I think, and 30 points in that game. And it took Dak Prescott being able to lead them back down the field for them to win. I think that's, it's not to say, again, that they're not the best team going right now. I will give them that. And I think that continues to be reinforced even after a game like last night. But, if you're looking for the sort of team that can test them, it's somebody who's going to have a quarterback who can extend plays in the pocket like Roethlisberger and is going to have some weapons on the perimeter where you can test that secondary, expose their zones, run after the catch, and make big plays. Because if the Cowboys defense is built to do one thing, is prevent you from going over the top. They're going to sit back, play a lot of two-deep coverage, not blitz you a whole lot. Last night against Minnesota, I mean, I don't know if they rushed more than a handful of times in the entire game. They were rushing 3 at times, and they were getting 2 home to the quarterback. So that's exactly what you would expect them to do. That's the sort of team, though, that I think can test them. And if you look through the rest of the NFC field, is that team Seattle with Doug Baldwin, Jimmy Graham, Russell Wilson, his ability to be able to extend plays? I think that possibly that could be that sort of matchup. But Seahawks defense, as talented as they are, would still have to slow down Ezekiel Elliott and Dak Prescott and Dez Bryant. I mean, the Cowboys have weapons. Watching Cole Beasley work last night, too. That guy's route craft as good as anybody in the entire league. The Cowboys are a very impressive team right now, but do they have flaws? Every team in the NFL has flaws. From Amanda, do you think the Broncos will make it in the playoffs? Right now they would not. If the season ended today, but it doesn't end today. They got 5 weeks to go. They're going down to Jacksonville. Trevor Siemian ruled out for that game. Paxton Lynch needs to play better than he did in his first start. He's a young quarterback. Somebody who, when he was coming out of Memphis, scouts felt that he needed to sit for a while, a year or two, really get submerged into an NFL offense, get time to understand, be able to call plays, be able to operate from under center, be able to make checks at the line of scrimmage, things that he wasn't asked to do at a really high level back there at Memphis. I picked the Jaguars to win that game before I even knew that Paxton Lynch was starting, just because I think the Jaguars have been on the precipice. They've played pretty good defense. I think that the one thing that people are starting to figure out about the Broncos is defensively, as good as they are rushing the passer and stopping the pass, you can run on them. Look at the numbers. I think they're 27th right now in rush yards allowed total. They're like 21st in rush yards per run play. And they're a team that doesn't necessarily like being kicked in the teeth. They don't want you to run the football down their throats. I think that's what you're going to see Jacksonville and everybody else try to do, which is soften them up between the tackles, run the football at him. Malik Jackson now is a Jaguar. He was somebody who was a big factor in the run phase a year ago. They also had Danny Trevathan at that time. I think that's the formula for trying to get after the Broncos, which is don't get into those third and medium to long situations. Try to run the football. Even if you're only picking up 3 yards a carry, just keep shortening the field a little bit there so you don't have the deep dropbacks end up in those third and long situations when Von Miller can absolutely destroy the game. To answer your question, do they make the playoffs? I still think that they get in. I think that they are a better team overall right now than the Dolphins, but even within their own division, the Raiders, the Chiefs, I would put the Broncos right now being the third best team out of that group. And they're going to have to be able to win a bunch of games here, because I think that 10 wins even might not be enough to get into the playoff field in the AFC. From Justin, can the Bucs overtake the Falcons in the NFC South? Well, the Bucs made a big statement last week against the Seattle Seahawks. I don't think there's any question about that. I think that defensively, as much as anything, what they did with Gerald McCoy up front, a defensive tackle that sort of blows it up again, whether it's Gerald McCoy or whether it's Aaron Donald, a disruptive defensive tackle against a team like the Seahawks causes big-time issues. Then it helps when you have a guy like Noah Spence, who had his best game as a pro coming off the edge. I think the Bucs defense showed signs there that they had the opportunity to keep getting better. I think offensively, the Bucs had better balance than they've had. With Doug Martin now back in the backfield, Mike Evans is just as tough as any receiver in the NFL right now. Do they have the firepower? I'm not entirely certain. I wouldn't rule it out. I think the Falcons have flaws on the defensive side of the football, but they've been so good offensively, spreading the football around, utilizing all their weapons, getting stuff out of guys like Taylor Gabriel that a team like the Cleveland Browns decided they didn't have a use for. I think that they've done a really good job. I think the Falcons end up winning that division, but I certainly think that it is competitive as we move forward, because the Bucs have shown they can be a competitive team. Big game for them coming up in a couple of weeks against the Dallas Cowboys. That'll be a true measuring sticks kind of a game, assuming that the Bucs haven't already lost ground before then. From Terry, I hear the Browns are asking for a recount after the Dallas Vikings game. Not sure entirely what that means, but it's kind of funny. From Dale, will the Packers finish with a 3 wins and 2 losses in their last 5 games? I mean, I'd have to look up the Packers' schedule. I think that they win on Sunday against the Houston Texans. I think that following week's game that I'll be at over in Green Bay, that could end up being a defining moment for where they are at in their season against the Seattle Seahawks coming in, one of the NFC frontrunners. I think that the Green Bay team you saw in Philadelphia looked a lot more like what we thought the Packers were going to look like, but they're still really shorthanded on the back end. The reason I picked the Packers to beat the Eagles on Monday night was because their greatest weakness in the secondary was not going to be as exposed as much by an Eagles offense, that lacks matchup weapons on the perimeter. Eagles receivers just aren't very good. As you get into teams that have better receivers, I think that's going to challenge them more, especially if Clay Matthews, who's got that banged up shoulder from the hit that he took from Alan Barber, is not able to go. I think it's going to be tough for the Packers going forward, but they've got a certain level of control over their destiny right now. They still get the Vikings again, they still get the Lions again, and they get the Seahawks. I'm not saying that they're going to run the table here, but they're at least going to be in the mix, I think, going forward, especially being able to face a couple of the teams that they're competing with right now to get into the postseason. Take just a couple of more questions here before I completely lose my voice. From Daniel, it's called BS penalties from the referees. Vikings don't have their star players. Again, it's not, I don't think that it has anything to do. I understand people didn't want the call on Cordero Patterson. the push-off call early in the game, and that was a questionable one too. But I mean, look at the holding call on Doug Free. Look at the fact that maybe they missed a false start on the 2-point conversion everybody was mad about with Sam Bradford. I will always say the most likely explanation when you have mistakes made in things like officiating is not agendas, it's incompetence. Not to say the NFL officials are incompetent, it's just that people make mistakes. That is the human element. Some people love it, some people hate it. I don't think that it's about who's on the field. Yes, there are certain players who probably are going to get a certain level of respect because they're good enough to be able to conceal some of the things they do. There are certain players who have mastered the art of the push-off and all those things. I don't think that it's, you look at the nameplate and you decide whether or not the guy's going to get the call. Could that be influenced? Sure. It's human nature. But over the course of that game, I don't think the officials cost the Vikings the game by any stretch of the imagination. If Adam Thielen can hold on to a ball on a punt, I don't think we're even sitting here talking about that this morning. From Chris, Romo headed to Denver. Talk about that in the offseason. There's a lot of different possibilities with Tony Romo, what should be a really interesting quarterback market as we head into the offseason. From Timothy, who will top the AFC North, and will Marvin Lewis be in Cincy next year? I would bet on the Steelers right now, topping the AFC North. Big one for them against the Giants this weekend. With Marvin Lewis in Cincinnati, anywhere else in the league, you'd say Marvin Lewis is probably done. But Cincinnati is not anywhere else in the league. Nowhere else in the league would you've gotten 14 years without a playoff victory. The Bengals operate unlike anybody else in the entire league. Who knows how they decide to move forward with Marvin Lewis, especially if Mike Brown doesn't want to commit a multi-year, long-term contract to a new coach and owe him a whole bunch of money. Marvin's, to a large degree, just been operating on 1 and 2 year sorts of extensions here. A new coach is not going to take a 1 or 2 year deal to come in. So there's a lot of different factors at play. The Bengals, one of the more unpredictable teams in the league with things like this. From Justin, will the Jets win a championship ever? It's not going to happen this season, I can tell you that, although you can get 1,000 to 1 odds at some of the sports books right now. All right, last couple of questions here from Helen. What is your opinion on Cardinals? You think they still have a chance the way they are playing? Cardinals are a perplexing team because if you look at a lot of the numbers, they're number 1 right now in defense. They're top 10 in offense. You look at a lot of the key categories, and they rank up there too. The last couple of games early in the season where a field goal, a kick would have won it for them. But they've put themselves in this spot. They've not been able to seal games. You look at the end of the game against Minnesota. You look at how things turned late in the second half against Atlanta. They've had chances here. I just think that they're another team like the Panthers, rather. I don't think it's a matter of do they have the talent to stack up. I think the Cardinals are a dangerous team every single week. I just think that they're in such a tough spot right now in terms of their record to try to get back in. They're not done, but it's really not going to be easy. They're going to need a lot of help. All right, thank you very much. I'm running out here. I got nothing left. It's been a long 24 hours here. I'm headed to Pittsburgh tomorrow for that game. We'll be back Monday for another chat from out in Pittsburgh. Enjoy all the games this weekend. Thank you very much for coming out, of course. Please like the USA Today Sports Facebook page, and you can set it up in your settings in Facebook to alert you whenever we're going live. I'm Tom Pelissero with USA Today. Talk to you on Monday.